Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and happy holidays and Merry Christmas for those of you who celebrate Christmas. For those of you who don't, please forgive me, but it is Christmas Eve. So for those people who celebrate it, it's kind of a big deal. So I just wanted to mention it, but happy holidays to you as well. Happy solstice to all my pagan friends out there, and I have many of them. And happy holiday no matter what it is for you. If you don't celebrate any holidays, happy day. Just have a happy day. Just be happy. Just be happy. This video, unfortunately, is not necessarily a happy video. This video is the worst show of the year, as deemed by moi and no one else. This is part of a series of videos in which I name the best and worst of 2021 as deemed by me. And this week I am going to talk about my pick for the worst show of 2021. Now, obviously, only shows that I actually watched are eligible for this. So I'm sure there's plenty of bad shows out there that I did not watch. But I did watch 20, I think I'm at 22 shows or something along those lines in 2021. So of all of those, this one that I'm about to talk about is the worst, and I would say by far the worst piece of garbage that I had to suffer through. Okay, so what is my worst show of the year? Without further ado, here it is. The worst show of the year is The Nevers on HBO. I watched it on HBO Max. Actually, we could call it Joss Whedon's The Nevers, because he probably deserves a great deal of the credit for this train wreck of a show, but maybe not all of the credit, and I'll get a little bit into the Joss Whedon of it all in just a second here. But The Nevers is a show that came out on HBO in about mid-April, and ironically was in the Game of Thrones time slot. It even started around the same time of year that Game of Thrones used to start, mid-April, Sundays at 9. And I say ironically because there's a similarity between this show and the last season of Game of Thrones, which I, again, will talk about a little bit later on. So now let's get into The Nevers a little bit. This video, as with all of my other best and worst videos, will be spoiler-free. With this one, I'll give a little asterisk, mostly spoiler-free. There is an element of the finale that I have to talk about that maybe some people would consider a spoiler. I don't, because there are way more details that I could get into that would really spoil it. But if you're sensitive about spoilers, then maybe you don't want to watch it. But honestly, I wouldn't watch this show if I were you, so who cares if you're a little bit spoiled. But I do have to maybe slightly spoil it with the finale, just because it's impossible to really talk about why I hate this show without talking about this one specific thing. So anyways, let me start by talking about Joss Whedon. So he is the creator of the show. This show is his brainchild, but he did leave as the showrunner in November 2020. The show was still in production. They hired a new showrunner in January, and the show was released in April. From what I understand, Joss Whedon wrote and directed the pilot episode, and he also directed the first 3 episodes in all, and there were 6 episodes in the season, so I am unclear on how much he had to do with the other 3 episodes. But he left supposedly, according to him, it's so hard to do show in COVID. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that most likely all the pressure and all the heat and all the bad press that was on him may have had something to do with it as well. If you're not familiar with that whole thing, a lot of things were coming to light about Joss Whedon being verbally abusive, going all the way back to his days on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And Ray Fisher, who played the Cyborg in the Justice League, came out and said all these things about how he was one of the worst people to ever work with, and just how abusive he was on set, and particularly to the actresses, to the female staff, and which is ironic because he always portrayed himself as this feminist. I am a male feminist. Look, I have strong women in my film, so I'm a male feminist. Turns out, not so much, really. Kind of a faux feminist. And I actually think that that influences the Nevers, too. I can find some faux feminism in the Nevers, but I will get to that just a second. So he left, and perhaps the reason why this is such a disaster could have something to do with a change in leadership midstream. It could be all of his fault. It could be a combination of those different factors, because really my biggest beef is with the finale, which is not something that Joss Whedon directed, and I don't know how much influence he had on it. So maybe the finale was a disaster because of the change in leadership midstream. Maybe it's because Joss Whedon sucks. I don't know. I do know that there are things that I think should have been embedded from episode 1 that were not, and I'm going to talk about that. I know I keep saying that, but there's a bunch of things I'm going to talk about more in a minute. There are elements that should have been embedded from episode 1 that were not, and that's definitely got to be Joss Whedon's fault, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different factors here, but the end result, no matter how you look at it, is a complete and utter disaster. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot in a very spoiler-free way. So it takes place in Victorian England in 1898, if I remember correctly. And this takes place a couple years after a very strange event took place where this weird thing was flying in the sky, and it caused all of these people to gain these powers, and almost all of those people were women. There are some men here and there who get the powers. There's one main male character who has these powers. Mostly they're women. They are referred to as the Touched. And honestly, they're pretty much mutants. And they are treated by society the same way that the mutants are treated in the Marvel comic universe. Looked down upon, looked down with scorn, and people want to stay away from them, and all of those sorts of things. So this show is basically the X-Men in Victorian England with mostly women. It even has a Professor X-like character, and I'm blanking on this character's name, and I'm going to be honest, I kind of don't really care enough to look it up. And no disrespect to the actresses in this show. They are fine. Actually, they're pretty good, some of them. It's not their fault that this show was a disaster. But I'm not going to look up this character's name. I don't care. It's Professor X, the version of Professor X in this show. And so she even has a little school for mutants. I mean, the Touched. And, it's just very similar to it. And as I am watching these first 5 episodes, this is the plot that we're following through the first 5 episodes of this show. And I found it kind of, yeah, it's fine. Like, I didn't hate it through the first 5 episodes. It wasn't until the finale that I hated it and called it the worst show. Through the first 5, I wouldn't call it the worst show. It is mediocre. Is fine. It was very similar to the X-Men. And then kind of when you think about Joss Whedon's issues, I can see the faux feminism comes through, because it's very much trying to portray these women, being set aside by society. Oh, look at how these women are treated. But they're not treated that way because they are women. They're treated that way because they have these powers. And there is a male character who also happens to be African American, or I guess African British, because this is in England, but he's black. I'm not sure what the proper term would be. But there is a black character also who's male, who is touched. So I think Joss Whedon is maybe trying to say, look, I care about black people. Look, I care about women. But they're not really doing any kind of true metaphor for what it's like to be women or to be black. It's just kind of like, oh, these are, it's like mutants. It basically ends up playing like the X-Men, and it's very surface level. So it kind of purports itself to be a feminist show, but I would say, again, it's faux feminism, just like the man himself who came up with this show. But all of that is not why this is the worst show of 2021. Let me tell you why it's the worst show of 2021, and it has everything to do with that 6th episode, that final episode of this season. Okay, so this finale, and here's where I might be a touch spoilery, but I have to talk about this. So we have been following through the first 5 episodes this 1898 Victorian England X-Men, X-Women type situation all the way up through the first 5 episodes, okay? So in the 6th and final episode, what we open up with is a post-apocalyptic alien war with characters in this post-apocalyptic future we have never ever seen before, and have no idea how they connect with our other characters. We have no idea how this storyline connects with the first 5 episodes worth of storyline that we had been following. They are throwing out all of this terminology that pertains to this war that we have never heard before, so it's all new. It's all being thrown at you at once. And when I first turned it on, I thought that I must have clicked on the wrong show. So I hit pause, and when you're on HBO Max, like, it tells you the name of the show in the corner of the screen. It's like The Never, season 1, episode 6. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So then I actually stopped it, went back to the HBO Max homepage and clicked on The Nevers, again, latest episode, to make sure that I really had the correct show. And it was still this weird post-apocalyptic alien warfare with a bunch of characters we'd never seen before. I was like, what in the hell? So what I decided to do was fast forward until I saw a familiar character. So I had to fast forward to about the 22-minute mark of the show, and finally I saw a character I recognized. And then I was like, oh, okay, so this is the correct show. Let me go ahead and rewind back and watch this weird alien post-apocalyptic war that has nothing to do with anything as far as I could tell, with characters that I have no reason to care about because I've never met them before. So, well, let me go ahead and watch it. So then I did, and then later my mom texted me. My mom was also watching The Nevers, and she's like, hey, Alyssa, so I was trying to watch The Nevers, but I couldn't find it. I clicked on it, and it ended up in some weird show with some aliens or something. I don't know what it was. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I know. It's The Nevers. You just have to be patient with it. So when your audience doesn't know what show they're watching, that's bad. That's a bad sign. If they have to question if they are watching the correct show, that is not good. Your audience should be well aware of what show they're watching. So 22 minutes following characters that I have no relationship with, and they keep throwing out all this terminology. You have to kind of learn on the fly because this world has not been built at all. Now, by the end of the episode, you do see what the connection is between this world and the Victorian England X-Men world that we have been following for 5 full episodes. By the end of it, you do see that connection. However, it is just extremely jarring, and it just plays to me like a 12-year-old wrote this show. And I know that's not the case. I know there's Joss Whedon, and then the controversy, and then the change in leadership. I don't know what the explanation is, but this really played like it was written by a 12-year-old. It was really disastrous. So what I think this show could have done, what the writers, with Joss Whedon, the creative force behind it, could have done to fix that would have been simply to disseminate this other storyline throughout the season. So as I said, it does connect, and this is where I'm not being spoilery. I'm not going to tell you how it connects, but it does connect to our main storyline. What they should have done is In the very first episode, we get our first glimpse of this weird alien post-apocalyptic world. And at that point, that is an appropriate time for the audience to be like, what in the hell? What does this have to do with anything? And then the second episode, we get a little bit more, and they need to do it in a way that draws us in, and we're intrigued by it, and we start caring about these other characters. We start learning this other terminology, and we start building this other world very gradually. Get the audience invested into this other world. And the meanwhile, start making us question, how are these two worlds related? What do they have to do with each other? And then in the third episode, give us a little more. Fourth episode, a little bit more, and just build and give us more hints until you get to that final episode. By the time you get there, you are as much familiar with this alien world as you are familiar with the Victorian world, and then it all comes together, and you're like, oh my god, that is beautiful, it ties together, that's amazing. That could have been pretty good. And that's the most disappointing thing about this show to me, is because in the right hands, this could have been a really good show. Like, I could be talking about this next week in my top 10 shows, maybe even my number one show of the year, if they had done it well. Instead, they decide to throw this entire new plot on you at once, and it is a disaster. And the reason why I said it's ironic that it's in the Game of Thrones time slot, because Game of Thrones, of course, is known for, in its final season, rushing it. And I got the same sense in this show, because, so we have 5 episodes, and honestly, I didn't know that there were only 6 episodes. I thought there were like 8, because to me it felt like there were 3 more full episodes worth of story left to be told. But the amount of storyline that we got forward of episode 5, which I thought should be 3 hours, amounted to about 10 minutes. Because not only did we have the 22-minute weird alien storyline, then we have another 20-minute chunk of episode that is X-Men Origins Professor X. We get our origin story of our Professor X, our Lady X character, which honestly should have also been disseminated across the episodes if they wanted us to know it, and not just dropped on us all at once. So 20 minutes of the alien storyline, 20 minutes of an origin, and then 10 minutes of story that continues from episode 5, which I felt like was supposed to be about 3 hours. So a disaster, an absolute train wreck of a show that could have been so good in the right hands. And you know who I think could have done a good job with this story concept. Hear me out. That guy right there, Damon Lindelof. Now, hear me out. If you only know Damon Lindelof from Lost, you might think I'm crazy, but after Lost, he went on to do The Leftovers, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, and had a brilliant ending, as well as a couple of episodes in season 2 and season 3, which I think are works of art. Some of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. And then after The Leftovers, Damon Lindelof comes out with Watchmen on HBO, and Watchmen was my number one show of 2019 and remains one of the best seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. I would go far as to say it was a masterpiece. And if he had given the same kind of treatment to this story concept that he had given to Watchmen, I think I would be talking about it as my number one show of the year. But it wasn't in his hands. So actually, it's interesting, because I was talking earlier about how they should disseminate the storyline throughout the 6 episodes. That is exactly what Damon Lindelof did with the Jeremy Irons storyline in Watchmen. As when you first see it, you're like, what in the fuck is this? This is so weird. I don't understand what this has to do with anything. But it was weird enough that it was intriguing and it drew you in, and it did exactly what as I described earlier, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until you get to that final episode and it all ties together, and it's amazing. So Lindelof's already done it. He's done that kind of thing. He could probably do it in his sleep. So he could have taken this story concept and made it really good. Or probably other people too, maybe not just Damon Lindelof, but that's what's the most frustrating about this show to me, is that it was a disaster, but it could have been really good. Now, one more footnote. I did actually learn after the fact that supposedly this was a 6-episode block that was just the first half of the first season. They wanted to do 12 episodes, so supposedly at some point they're going to do another 6 episodes. If they do, I'm not wasting 1 millisecond of my life on this garbage. There's really no way they could fix the damage done by the finale of the first 6 episodes. There's nothing they can do in the second 6 episodes, if they even bother making them at this point, that would fix this train wreck. So one could say, well, it wasn't a complete story. It was just the first half of the season, so that's why I didn't feel finished. That's why I felt rushed, blah, blah, blah. But no, you still have to have some kind of sense of finality, even on the first half of a season. Even Star Trek Prodigy did this through its first quarter of the season. Masters of the Universe Revelation did this through its first part of the season. Back in the day, Breaking Bad did this. So you can make it feel kind of like a resolution, even if it's just the first half of the season. And this absolutely failed in that regard, and in all regards, a complete failure. Okay, alright, so I think it's time to give my rating for the Nevers out of 10. So 1 would be the lowest possible score that I could give any show. 10 would be the highest possible score that I would give. And what I am giving the Nevers out of 10 is a 1. The lowest rating that you could get. I did consider briefly a 2 because of the fact that the first 5 episodes were not terrible, but honestly everything hinges on the finale. Because of the fact that the finale was so terrible that it then retroactively goes back and makes the other 5 episodes terrible as well. The whole house of cards comes tumbling down, and it's a train wreck. So it is definitely a 1, the worst piece of shit show that I had to suffer through in 2021, and probably in quite some time. I definitely would not recommend watching it, but if you want to see if you disagree with me, go ahead and check it out. There definitely were some good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, but I think those people are crazy. So I'm kidding. I strongly disagree with those people. To me, this is definitely a 1, the lowest possible rating I would ever give anything. Okay, and that does it for my video for the worst show of 2021. Next week, super excited! I'm going to be a lot more positive with my top 10 best shows of 2021. As I said earlier, I have watched about 20 some odd shows. I've got a couple more that still haven't quite finished up. So it'll be roughly half of the shows that I've watched this year will be in my top 10. Plus, I'll do a couple of honorable mentions as well. I'm super looking forward to doing that, and I really, really hope you would join me for it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I will see you there, and I will see you all my other content related to my trans identity, related to Star Trek, Discovery, related to the Wheel of Time, Star Wars, everything else. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.